The soft, golden light of the living room lamp glimmered faintly, casting the silhouettes of two figures facing each other in the stillness of the night. The house seemed long since asleep, only the steady ticking of the clock echoing quietly in the space. Yet there, in the kitchen, Nolan Grant and Leela Hart stood across from each other, just a single step apart, their breath lingering thick in the heavy air, the scent of mint and hot chocolate still on their lips. Leela wore a pale nightgown, her fair skin glowing softly in the dim light, messy hair falling over her shoulders. The eyes of the 19-year-old girl shone with confusion, a blend of fear and a longing for something she could not name. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of a chair, struggling to hold on to the last remnants of her composure. Nolan, 44, tried to breathe deeply, fingers clenching tightly around his glass, gaze hypnotized by every movement Leela made. His heart pounded with a tangled storm of fear, guilt, desire, and confusion, so much so that a single word could shatter everything, bringing forth a truth from which there would be no return. The space between them was so small that, with just a tilt of the body, a light touch, every final boundary might collapse. "Can't sleep, uncle?" Leela's gentle voice broke the silence, making the air seem to crack open. Nolan nodded, saying nothing, his eyes still fixed on her. For a long moment, neither moved, neither dared step forward, nor had the courage to turn away. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the staircase, Ruby Doyle shifting in her bed upstairs. Nolan jolted, instinctively stepping back, while Leela melted into the shadows, both of them holding their breath, listening to every tiny sound, hearts thundering in their chests as if they might burst. That night, nothing else was said, but both of them knew the fragile boundary that once existed between them was now fading, slipping quietly into something neither could ignore. That summer, Nolan Grant's little house seemed to come alive again when his only daughter, Ruby Doyle, cheerfully announced, "Dad, is it okay if Leela stays with us for a few weeks?" Nolan still remembered the feeling that day, as if it was nothing special at all. Despite being 44 and having experienced his share of hardships, he had never been prepared for the arrival of another young woman in his home, someone at once unfamiliar yet strangely close. Leela Hart arrived on a dazzling sunny afternoon, pulling a small suitcase behind her, a backpack slung over her shoulder, her light brown hair hastily tied up, exposing the pale nape of her neck. Leela greeted him with a polite smile. "Hello, Mr. Nolan. I hope I'm not imposing." Nolan's first impression of Leela was the intelligence in her eyes and the way her lips always seemed on the verge of a smile. She no longer had the innocent look of a child, yet she hadn't acquired the composure of a grown woman either. Leela was an undefinable mix, both pure and alluring in her own way. Those first days, everything unfolded naturally. Ruby and Leela were inseparable, grocery shopping together, cooking, cleaning, watching movies, and sometimes dragging Nolan into endless funny stories about high school, favorite singers and movies, or silly things he couldn't even remember the last time he'd laughed so freely. Leela always took the initiative to help from breakfast to dinner, skillful but never showy. Sometimes she'd sit across from Nolan at the dining table, listening intently as he talked about his work in architecture, her eyes always sparkling with genuine interest. With each passing day, Nolan began to notice something different about this young woman. It wasn't simply the beauty of 19, but the way Leela looked him straight in the eye during conversation, or the gentle tilt of her head when listening, the sly little smile that made it seem like she was harboring a secret. There was a time when Leela and Ruby prepared afternoon tea for the family. Nolan couldn't help but notice how light and innocent Leela's dress looked that day, so much so that he had to look away and remind himself, she's just Ruby's friend. Yet, from one unintended moment, he realized Leela's gaze lingered on him longer than usual. Sometimes during dinner, Nolan would catch her quietly watching him, her gentle smile hinting at something deeper than the surface of a girl in her 20s. Those times when their hands brushed as they reached for a plate, or all three squeezed together in the tiny kitchen, his heart would suddenly freeze in his chest. His awkwardness never escaped Leela's notice, which only seemed to amuse her, making her, accidentally, stand closer and tease him when Ruby wasn't paying attention. At night, the house gradually fell silent. Ruby went to bed early to prepare for extra classes, and Nolan often worked in the living room, the desk lamp casting a long shadow on the ceiling. Some nights, Leela would come down for a drink of water, unexpectedly running into him as he wrote. At first, their exchanges were brief, but gradually their conversations grew longer. About a book Leela was reading, her dreams for the future, and even little personal things like her fear of being alone at night. Nolan found himself listening more, patiently explaining and sharing life experiences he had kept to himself for so long. One night, after Ruby had fallen soundly asleep, Leela quietly came downstairs, her hair still damp from her shower, wrapped in a thin, floral nightgown. She made 2 mugs of hot chocolate and sat across from Nolan. The soft kitchen light painted her face with a gentle warmth, making every angle seem softer. That evening, they spoke of things they never thought they'd share. Nolan's loss, Leela's mother passing away when she was young, the loneliness that crept in when night fell. For the first time, Nolan revealed his vulnerability to someone other than Ruby, admitting that he often couldn't sleep, that he sometimes dreamt of his youth and his late wife. Leela listened, her eyes shining, not a trace of judgment in her expression. "I think not everyone has the courage to be lonely and still live well like you do," she said. It was a simple statement, yet Nolan felt it went deeper than any polite consolation. In that moment, Leela gently placed her hand on the back of his, a touch so light, so brief, that it left Nolan so flustered he stood up immediately, making an excuse to tidy the mugs. Behind him, Leela remained seated, silent, her eyes soft but seeming to hold a small, flickering flame. That night, Nolan lay awake for hours, unable to understand why that image haunted his mind. From then on, every small interaction slowly took on meanings they couldn't name. Leela, accidentally, chose to sit close to Nolan whenever the 3 watched movies together. Occasionally, when Ruby went out to shop and only the 2 of them were home, the atmosphere turned so strange that Nolan had to calm himself with a father's reason. Until one evening, after dinner, while Ruby was outside on the phone, Leela took the chance to clean up the kitchen. Nolan helped her arrange the dishes, the small space forcing them closer together than usual. Leela leaned over to reach a bowl, her arm brushing his shoulder, the faint scent of perfume in the air. Suddenly, the bowl slipped from her hand, landing softly on the floor without breaking. As Nolan bent down to pick it up and stood up, their faces were barely a breath apart. Leela's brown eyes stared into his, deep and bright in a way he'd never seen before. For a moment, both seemed to stop breathing. Ruby's voice called from outside, shattering the moment. Leela quickly stooped to retrieve the bowl, laughing it off, while Nolan turned away, feeling his heart pounding uncontrollably in his chest. That night, for the first time, Nolan had to admit to himself. What he felt for Leela was no longer the simple affection of a father for his daughter's friend, but something dangerous and warm, both terrifying and inescapable. And from that small moment, a hidden fire began to burn, smoldering, slow, but growing more and more real with each passing day. Ever since that moment in the kitchen, everything that once seemed normal between Nolan and Leela suddenly felt different. A silent tension charged the air, like an invisible thread pulling them ever closer with every passing beat of daily life. Nolan tried to maintain a composed demeanor in front of Ruby, but deep down, he knew that Leela's gaze was changing day by day, full of things left unsaid. Even without looking, he could feel her presence in every corner of the house, like a warm, gentle, and dangerous ray of light. Day by day, the atmosphere in the house became more intimate. Ruby, busy with her extra classes and clubs, left Nolan and Leela with plenty of time together, sometimes just quiet moments in the kitchen, sometimes lazy afternoons reading side by side in the living room. In those moments, both kept a polite front, their conversations light, but beneath it all was the slow, simmering undercurrent of curiosity and secret longing. One evening, When Ruby went to a friend's birthday party and would be home late, Leela suggested making pizza at home and invited Nolan to help. The kitchen became their private world. Laughter, soft music, the scent of rising dough, tomato sauce, and melting cheese filled the air. Leela was completely natural, not shy at all. She playfully dusted flour onto Nolan's nose, grinning brightly as he tried to avoid her, only pretending nothing was amiss. Their hands brushed again and again, no longer always by accident. Occasionally, Nolan caught Leela looking at him through her tousled hair, her eyes asking silent questions, part innocence, part challenge. When the pizza was finally in the oven, Leela leaned back against the counter and asked quietly, "Do you usually cook for yourself, or do you just wait for Ruby and me to do everything?" Nolan shook his head, not answering right away, his gaze lingering, unintentionally, on the curve of her lips. "I can cook, but food tastes better when there's someone cheerful in the kitchen with me." What sounded like casual conversation made Leela blush, and the two of them burst out laughing, like children caught up in their own little mischief. Yet beneath that laughter, there was another meaning, one only they understood. That night, after dinner, Ruby texted that she'd be home later than expected. Leela invited Nolan to watch a new romantic comedy with her. The long sofa, just the two of them sitting close together, the soft darkness of the room made the space between them feel even more fragile. The movie was filled with intimate scenes, hugs, kisses, making the atmosphere between them increasingly strange. Slowly, Leela rested her head on Nolan's shoulder, her breathing steady, her hair, scented like grapefruit, brushed against his collar. At first, Nolan froze, but gradually he relaxed, struggling to appear calm, eyes fixed on the screen. When the female lead turned to kiss the man, Leela whispered softly, "Do you think it's strange to love someone much older?" Nolan tensed, fingers unconsciously clenching, the silence stretching on as if it would never end. He finally managed to reply, "Whether it's strange or not depends on how they truly feel." Leela was quiet for a moment, then edged closer, her knee pressing against Nolan's, as if testing his limits. Nolan's heart pounded, but his reason warned him, one wrong move and everything would fall apart. When the movie ended, Leela stood up quietly, offering a gentle smile. "I'll go to bed now. Good night, Uncle." Yet that smile left a burning imprint deep inside Nolan, impossible to shake off. In the following days, things only grew more complicated. Whenever Ruby was out, Leela found ways to create time alone with Nolan, sometimes cleaning together, sometimes simply talking about school and dreams for the future. Yet beneath the ordinary surface, the tension grew stronger every day. Once, while cleaning the windows together, Leela stood on a chair and Nolan steadied it from below, his hand accidentally rested on her bare calf. What would have been a normal touch suddenly made them both freeze. Their eyes met in awkwardness, then they both laughed it off, trying to shake the embarrassment. But both knew those touches were no longer innocent. Some nights, Ruby went to bed early, exhausted, while Nolan stayed up working in the living room. Leela would come down for water, dressed in a long t-shirt that covered her thighs, hair falling loose and soft. She would quietly sit across from him, her eyes sparkling under the lamp. "You always stay up late, don't you?" she would ask softly. "I can't sleep somehow. Your house feels safer than mine at night." Nolan nodded, unsure how to respond. They talked more, sharing little stories, times when Leela got scolded by her mother, her dream of traveling to Paris, his own late-night reading habits. The intimacy grew so strong that Nolan felt he was confiding in a true companion. On another night, just after Ruby had left for a study group, Leela quietly slipped into Nolan's office, setting a cup of ginger tea on his desk. "I made this for you, helps you sleep," she said. Nolan smiled his thanks, but their eyes lingered a moment too long. Leela didn't hurry away. She stood beside his chair, her hands resting lightly on the back. Nolan looked up, catching that gaze, and it was as if the world shrank to just that room and the two of them. One breath lingered. He became acutely aware of her young skin, the heat of her body so full of life. His own hand began to tremble slightly. He had to turn away, focusing on the blueprints on the desk just to escape her eyes. "Aren't you afraid Ruby will catch me sneaking around in your office?" Leela teased, her voice husky and low. Nolan shook his head, lips curving in a faint smile, but his mind was in knots. Leela leaned closer, whispering, "I think sometimes adults need a little surprise in life, don't you think?" Her eyes were full of challenge and invitation. Nolan knew he had to maintain the boundary, but he also knew that boundary was thinner than ever. One rainy afternoon, Ruby went shopping with friends, leaving Leela and Nolan sipping tea on the second-floor balcony, watching the rain. Leela sat curled up, a thin blanket draped over her shoulders, bare feet stretched out on the cold wooden floor. Staring out at the rain, she suddenly said, "I'm afraid that when I grow up, I won't be able to keep the things I want." Nolan turned to her and asked gently, "What do you want?" Leela was silent, gaze distant, then unexpectedly looked straight into his eyes. "I want someone who truly listens, truly understands, truly cares, even if it's not allowed." Her confession left Nolan bewildered. He realized he had become Leela's anchor, not just a guardian, but a real man in her eyes. Guilt mingled with a secret thrill, making each passing day even more suffocating. The culmination came one late night. Ruby was out at a friend's birthday party, leaving only Leela and Nolan at home. After a simple dinner, Leela asked him to join her in the living room to watch a movie. It was a romantic drama, full of intimate scenes. Leela was visibly moved, occasionally turning to smile or resting her head on Nolan's shoulder. His heart pounded wildly, though he struggled to remain calm. When the on-screen couple kissed in the rain, Leela whispered, "Do you think people can love someone even when they know they should?" Nolan couldn't answer right away, his throat suddenly dry. He simply nodded. The air grew thick with tension. Both could feel the magnetic pull between them. Leela edged even closer, her small hand resting on Nolan's thigh, a touch so light and quick, but it sent an electric jolt through his body. Nolan trembled, trying to hide his reaction. Just then, Ruby's phone rang from her upstairs bedroom, yanking them back to reality. Leela quickly withdrew her hand, gave a shy smile, and stood up. "I'll go to bed now." But her eyes still glimmered with unspoken words. Nolan sat for a long time in the dark, feeling the magnitude of what had just happened. No longer accidental touches, but intentional, unmistakable signals that the two of them had crossed too far beyond the safety zone. From that night, everything between them grew intensely clandestine. They avoided Ruby's eyes, but when alone, every gesture, every word, every smile carried a secret meaning. Nolan knew he was teetering on the thin edge between duty and temptation. He tried to restrain himself, but every moment near Leela, his resolve melted into quickened breath, into seemingly harmless touches that burned through every sense. One weekend night, the air was thick with heat, and a power outage left the house bathed in candlelight. Ruby went up to bed early, while Leela invited Nolan to play dominoes. The golden candlelight flickered over her face, her hair loose, her skin radiant in the shadows. Leela burst out laughing each time she lost, leaning into Nolan without a care, like a child. But the warmth and fresh scent of her hair made him so flustered he had to get up several times just to steady himself. When it was just the two of them, Leela lowered her voice. "I can't remember the last time I was this happy." Nolan looked into her eyes and saw a deep loneliness there. In that moment, he wanted to pull her close, to comfort and protect her, but he also feared he wouldn't be able to stop himself. Just as that thought flashed by, Leela gently placed her hand on his shoulder, her eyes searching deep into his. "I believe sometimes people just can't choose what they feel." The silence was suffocating. And yet, like so many times before, Nolan managed to pull away, simply smiling. "You should get some sleep, it's an early morning tomorrow." That night, both tossed and turned in their own rooms, but their feelings were trapped together in an undercurrent, pushing and pulling, threatening and inviting all at once. And that was only the beginning of the secret encounters to come, those late-night meetings in the dark kitchen, gentle touches on the stairs, brief, suggestive messages sent just as Ruby turned her back. Every small act nudged them closer to a line they both knew. If they took one more step, there would be no going back to how things once were. In the days that followed their stolen nights of intimacy, everything between Nolan and Leela grew more uncontrollable than ever. Gone was the mere awkwardness or accidental touch. Instead, there was now a secret, magnetic pull that wrapped tighter around them each day, drawing them past the final barriers. Sometimes, just walking past each other in the hallway, Leela's quiet gaze was enough to make Nolan forget to breathe. Every touch of their hands while carrying dishes together, or simply standing side by side at the kitchen door, now carried sparks. Subtle, yet burning hot beneath the surface. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Ruby accepted an invitation to go on a picnic with friends, leaving the house blissfully empty for just the two of them. Leela seized the chance to pull Nolan along to the supermarket to buy groceries for the coming week, playfully insisting that she was the best judge of beef in town. On the way home, a sudden downpour forced them to duck for shelter under the awning of a closed cafe. Leela shivered from the cold, her hair soaked and raindrops running down her cheeks, making her seem fragile and achingly close. Nolan awkwardly took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his fingers lightly brushing her cool skin, his body heat enveloping her in that moment. Leela looked up at him, her gaze lingering a little too long, half invitation, half pleading, her lips pressed tight with longing. Just as Nolan was about to let go, Leela suddenly rested her head against his chest, both her hands wrapping around his arm, surrendering to the rain as if the world outside had washed away every thought. In that moment, Nolan realized he wanted nothing more than to hold this young woman tightly, regardless of right or wrong. When the rain stopped, they returned home with tangled hair and soaked clothes, both laughing like children, yet neither able to hide the burning emotions smoldering beneath every word. Nolan made hot tea for Leela, and they sat close together on the living room couch, warmth radiating between them, their bare feet brushing beneath the table with no one pulling away. That night, with Ruby still out, Leela suggested they finish watching the movie they'd started before. In the dim room, the glow of the screen danced across her cheeks, and Leela seemed to deliberately leave just enough space between herself and Nolan for anything to happen. As the film reached its climax, Leela leaned closer into Nolan, her hand gently resting on his thigh. Nolan hesitated, his breath growing heavier, his whole body tensed as if waiting for something inevitable. In a moment suspended in time, Leela turned to him and whispered, "I like this feeling." Nolan didn't reply, but gazed deep into her eyes, where he saw everything he had tried so hard to deny. And then, almost helplessly, he bent down and placed the softest kiss on Leela's lips. Gentle, slow, as if daring them both to cross that final line of morality. That kiss lasted only seconds, but for Nolan, every sense was set ablaze. Leela responded with tender warmth, her hand squeezing his, both of them trembling in a mixture of delight and fear. Suddenly, the sound of Ruby's car outside and the sweep of headlights across the window broke the spell. Leela leapt up, quickly smoothing her hair, while Nolan hurried to the kitchen for water, masking the turmoil in his expression. Ruby entered the house, bubbling with stories about her friends, completely unaware of the charged atmosphere in the living room that had just been swept away like a thin layer of mist. That night, Nolan lay awake for a long time, haunted by the sweet yet guilty taste of the kiss they'd shared. He knew now that there was no turning back. Later, Leela sent him a brief message, just a few words. "Good night, Uncle." Yet it kept him restless until dawn. Night after night, every time they saw each other, they found ways to talk longer, exchanging meaningful glances or sending half-playful, half-serious messages about desires neither dared name aloud. On another occasion, Ruby invited her mother's friend over to spend the night, leaving just Layla and Nolan at home. That evening, a little wine at dinner loosened Leela's reserve. She spoke about her university life, distant dreams, and the deep loneliness she sometimes felt. Her hand rested on Nolan's, lingering, as if communicating a wordless confession. After dinner, they cleaned the kitchen together, soft music floating from the radio. Leela laughed and pulled Nolan close, whispering, "I think you're not a bad dancer, you know." Surprised, Nolan laughed too, letting Leela lead him in a slow dance, their hands intertwined in a silent rhythm. For a fleeting moment, Leela looked up, her lips parting, and they shared another kiss, longer, deeper, driven by pure instinct. This time, neither tried to stop. In that moment, all guilt and fear were swept up in the pounding rhythm of two lonely people finding each other in one strange summer. And yet, reason still lingered. Nolan was the one to pull away first, whispering, "We should." Leela smiled sadly, but her eyes held a trust that there would be more between them yet. From then on, there truly was no way back. Their messages grew more frequent, their conversations increasingly bold, laced with suggestive hints, as if they were both testing the limits of each other's self-control. They often shared subtle touches when no one was watching, drank tea together on the balcony late at night, leaving each other with feelings that were half real, half a dream. The stifling, pent-up longing reached its peak, just a look, a word, and it seemed a storm would break loose at any moment. One night, with Ruby deeply asleep, Leela quietly crept downstairs for water. Nolan happened to be there, making a cup of coffee for a long night ahead. They faced each other in the dim light, breath mingling thick in the air. Leela set her glass down, moved toward him without a word, and simply gazed into Nolan's eyes. In that instant, Nolan felt all resistance fade. He brushed her cheek with trembling fingers, tracing soft strands of hair, then pulled Leela gently into another kiss, sweet, deep, trembling, and fierce. Their bodies melted together in utter silence, as if the slightest noise would shatter the world. And still, fear and awareness of the boundary returned. When the sound of Ruby's footsteps drifted from the hallway above, Nolan instantly stepped away, and Leela turned quickly, neither daring to speak a word. That night, Leela sent Nolan a single, short message. "I never thought I could want something this much." Nolan read it again and again, unable to sleep. From then on, there was a tightening loop between them, the more forbidden, the more intoxicating. And both knew, if they continued, there would truly be no turning back. But somehow, that only made it all the more impossible to stop. After that kiss in the dim light of the kitchen, there was no longer any pretense of accident between Nolan and Leela. Everything became deliberate, a string of dangerous, clandestine days where every glance, every gesture, every touch was a challenge to the final boundary. They no longer avoided their feelings or hid their desires. Instead, the longing only grew stronger. The more forbidden it was, the harder it became to resist. Each morning, Leela appeared perfectly normal in front of Ruby, still the cheerful, enthusiastic best friend, but the moment Ruby turned away, Leela would cast Nolan a burning look. He tried to maintain his composure, but inside, waves of desire, guilt, and fear of discovery rolled stronger each day. Once, Ruby went away on a weekend trip with friends. The house was left to just the two of them. That newfound freedom broke down Nolan's last defenses. They ate breakfast together, sitting side by side, Leela's hand sometimes resting on his thigh in a way only they understood. There were stolen hugs, brief moments with her head resting on his shoulder, and times when Leela would wrap her arms around his waist from behind while he was cooking. Everything seemed so natural, as if they'd belonged to each other all along. One hot afternoon, Leela wore a thin camisole, sitting cross-legged on the sofa reading a book. Nolan walked by, planning to go to his study, but stopped and sat down beside her instead. They didn't speak. Their eyes met, and Leela's lips curved in a challenging smile. "Aren't you afraid someone might come home unexpectedly?" Leela teased. "I am," Nolan replied, "but I'm even more afraid of not being near you." The confession hung in the thickening air. Leela put her book aside and inched closer. Her hand slid lightly down Nolan's arm, her warm body close, lips almost touching an invitation. Nolan trembled, caught between the thrill and taboo of the moment. Leela leaned in to whisper, "I think we deserve happiness, even if it's just for this moment." This kiss was no longer hurried or afraid. It was long, passionate, bold, and consuming. Their hands explored each other, hearts racing, every ounce of reason swept away in the whirlwind of emotion. They allowed themselves those fleeting minutes before an unexpected phone call made them break apart. From then on, they became even more daring. One afternoon, while Ruby was at a study group, Leela entered Nolan's office and locked the door behind her. She perched on his desk, eyes challenging. "I want to see what you really do when no one else is around." Nolan didn't answer. He simply stepped closer, his hand running down her back, pulling her near. Their embraces, kisses, hurried breaths, soft laughter, and whispered words melted together, like two kids stealing the first forbidden fruit of the season. But after moments like these, guilt surged in Nolan. He tried to avoid Leela, throwing himself into work, but each time he saw her, even just her laughter or a glimmer of her eyes through a doorway, his willpower collapsed again. Leela no longer restrained herself either. She sent Nolan playful, suggestive messages, sweet invitations, even slipping a note into his pocket once. "I miss you." Sleepless nights became the norm. Sometimes, when Ruby was asleep, Nolan and Leela texted for hours about their fear of being discovered, about how they couldn't help but miss each other even knowing it was wrong. "I used to think this was just a crush," Leela confessed, "but now all I want is to be with you, no matter the consequences." Nolan read those words, his heart overflowing with joy, fear, guilt, and longing all at once. There were nights when Leela tiptoed downstairs, knowing Ruby was deep asleep, wearing only a flimsy nightgown, her hair loose and soft. Nolan would be there too, pouring a glass of water. No words were needed. They simply moved toward each other, hands entwined, their breaths mingling in the stillness of the small house. Leela leaned into Nolan, her arms gently tightening around him, letting every boundary dissolve into the darkness. Yet just as things seemed about to go too far, a small sound from upstairs, Ruby turning over in bed, reminded them of harsh reality. Nolan gently pushed Leela away, and both quietly returned to their rooms, hearts tangled with feelings left unspoken. Their recklessness only grew, and both lived in constant fear of discovery. Ruby began to notice odd glances and half-joking, half-serious comments between her father and her best friend. Sometimes she'd ask casually, "What's so funny between you two?" Nolan and Leela would just laugh, desperately hiding any hint of the truth. One night, while Nolan sat reading in the living room, Leela quietly joined him, pretending to read as well. Underneath the cushions, their hands found each other, squeezing tightly in the dark just to feel the other's heartbeat. In those silent moments, they sometimes felt happier than ever before. But that happiness was as fragile as a faint light at the end of the hallway, one door opening and everything could vanish. At a moment when it seemed the final boundary could not hold, Nolan and Leela finally let themselves be swept away. They knew that crossing the line, even just once, would change everything forever. But longing built up over time is a force impossible to resist. That night, Leela walked into Nolan's office and closed the door behind her. They rushed into each other's arms, mouths searching, hands exploring every secret part, like drowning souls grasping for one last breath. They didn't go all the way, but every embrace, every touch, every whispered word burned them from the inside out. That night, Nolan knew with absolute certainty he loved Leela with all the instinct and heart of a lonely man, even knowing how dangerous and impossible it all was. The next morning, when the first light crept through the curtains, they still had to play their roles in front of Ruby, pretending nothing had happened in that little house through the long night. But deep in their minds, the forbidden fire had already raged out of control, and neither of them had the strength left to turn back. Every secret, no matter how carefully guarded, must one day face the light. The tighter the secret bond between Nolan and Leela became, the greater the anxiety, vigilance, and fear of being discovered. In the last days of summer, as the air grew heavy and oppressive, everyone's moods seemed to become more sensitive as well. Ruby, with the perceptiveness of a 19-year-old woman, began to sense something wrong between her father and her best friend. Sometimes she'd see Leela sitting next to Nolan, their eyes meeting longer than usual. Other times, she'd enter the living room to find them giggling about a story only they seemed to understand. Ruby no longer felt at ease in her own home. She started to keep her distance, watching more closely, and quiet suspicions grew steadily inside her. One Friday afternoon, Ruby came home earlier than planned after a study group, as a sudden downpour had cut things short. She opened the door. The house was silent except for the sound of rain on the roof tiles. Planning to go upstairs, she realized she'd left her phone in her father's office. Walking in, she found Leela sitting on the edge of the desk, very close to Nolan, the two of them whispering and laughing, their hands gently entwined. The instant both realized Ruby's presence, the air in the room froze solid. Nolan hurriedly withdrew his hand, Leela nervously fixed her hair, while Ruby stood frozen, eyes wide, her face drained of color. Without a word, Ruby quietly left the room, went straight to her bedroom, and slammed the door. That sound echoed like a knife, severing any illusion of safety or secrecy the two adults had tried so hard to preserve. Nolan looked at Leela, his gaze full of regret and panic. "I'm sorry." He stammered, but Leela only shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. That evening became the longest of their lives. Ruby didn't come down for dinner. Leela retreated silently to her own room. Nolan knocked on his daughter's door, but got no reply. He went back to his room, heart clenched by the fear of losing everything, his own daughter, and the woman he loved. That night, all the emotions held back for so long finally burst. Ruby couldn't sleep, tears rolled silently down her cheeks onto the pillow. The pain of betrayal gnawed at her, piece by piece. Why her father? Why her very best friend? Suddenly, her world felt distorted and empty. In her mind, 1,000 questions, accusations, anger and grief screamed all at once. Ruby wanted to scream, to run, but all she could do was lie there, frozen in the storm of feelings she couldn't even name. Leela was no better. She lay on her bed, paralyzed by guilt. The courage that once let her follow her heart now felt like a deep, aching regret. She had traded too much for those secret, passionate moments, forgetting that she was hurting the one friend who had shared so many secrets, so many summers, and so much youth with her. Nolan sat alone in the kitchen, a glass of red wine glinting in the dim light. He replayed every moment with Leela, every touch, every kiss, every secret hour, in slow motion, each memory a portrait of selfishness and self-reproach. He loved Leela, that much was true, but that love had become a double-edged sword, cutting deep into the hearts of everyone he cherished most. The next morning, as Ruby packed her things to move in temporarily with her aunt, Nolan rushed to stop her, but Ruby only looked at him with cold, wounded eyes. "You betrayed me, Dad. I don't know what I can believe in anymore." She turned to Leela, her voice choked with tears. "I never thought you could do this to me." That was all. Ruby left without looking back. Nolan and Leela stood silent in the empty house, neither able to say a word. The days that followed were long, lonely, and full of regret and pain. Leela couldn't stay. She packed her things and left a short letter on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Nolan. I can't keep hurting the people I love. Please don't look for me." Nolan read the letter, tears streaming down his face, his heart gripped by a loss nothing could ever mend. Ruby lived quietly at her aunt's house, cutting off all contact with both her father and Leela. She didn't answer messages or pick up the phone. Leela stopped going to school, avoiding everyone, burying herself in lonely, remorseful days. As for Nolan, he drowned himself in work, trying to numb the pain, but the more he ran, the less he could soothe the wound inside. 3 people, 3 different agonies, all consumed by the darkness of an exposed truth. Every night, all 3 lay awake, haunted by memories of fleeting happiness, full of regret, sorrow, and uncertainty about whether they could ever forgive themselves or each other. On those sleepless nights, Nolan could only write quietly in his journal, remembering that fateful summer, the woman who came into his life like a storm, and the daughter he loved more than himself. He knew nothing could be undone, but still he hoped, somewhere ahead, there would come a day when every wound would be healed, every mistake forgiven, and every heart would be brave enough to love once more. Time drifted quietly by after the storm. Chilly autumn days arrived, bringing a hush and introspection to everyone's soul. 3 months since the secret had been revealed, Nolan Grant's house remained silent, every corner still holding bittersweet memories, tenderness mixed with the bitterness of words left unspoken. He became more withdrawn, rising early, returning late, tending to each plant in his garden as if to distract himself from the ever-present emptiness. Meals were now solitary. Laughter and light footsteps had vanished from the hallways, and every object in the house seemed cold and lifeless. Leela Hart had moved in with an aunt in the suburbs, taking a break from school, cutting off all contact with old friends, even Ruby. At first, she drowned in remorse, tears, and longing. Each night, Leela held her phone, meaning to send a message to Ruby or Nolan, only to delete it in fear of causing more pain, or perhaps fearing she didn't have the courage to face them. But the harder she tried to forget, the more the image of the little house, the evenings under soft yellow lamps, Nolan's deep voice, and Ruby's laughter returned vividly in her mind. As for Ruby Doyle, outwardly strong, she was no better. Living with her aunt, she threw herself into studying, joining countless activities to banish her sadness. Sometimes Ruby lay awake all night, tears slipping quietly as she read old messages and stared at the photo of the three of them in the garden from years before. She missed Leela, missed her father, but the pain of betrayal had not faded. It wasn't until an early winter afternoon, when golden leaves carpeted the path, that Ruby decided to return home to collect books for her final exams. Entering the familiar house, she froze. Almost nothing had changed, yet the air was entirely different, still, heavy, and melancholy. Nolan greeted his daughter with hesitant eyes, a mixture of happiness and awkwardness. The two sat across from each other at the dining table for a long time, a silence between them built from months of unspoken words. "Are you well, Ruby?" Nolan asked quietly, his voice trembling with emotion. Ruby nodded, unable to look him in the eye. After a while, she finally spoke. "Dad, do you regret it?" Nolan looked at his daughter and answered honestly, "I've regretted so much. Not for loving, but for hurting you, for causing you pain. I'm sorry." Tears welled in Ruby's eyes, and she shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, too, for not being brave enough to listen, to forgive you both sooner." After that meeting, Ruby decided to send Leela a message. A single, simple line, "I miss you. Can we meet and talk?" Leela burst into tears upon receiving it, as if a mountain had been lifted from her chest. They met at the little cafe near their old school, where they used to study and whisper secrets all through their teenage years. That conversation was filled with tears. Both poured out their pain, their longing, and the regret they'd held inside. Ruby listened as Leela explained everything, realizing that what Leela and Nolan had wasn't just a moment of recklessness, but a profound and genuine feeling. Looking into her best friend's eyes, Ruby spoke softly. "What hurt me most wasn't that you two loved each other. It was that you both stayed silent, kept it from me, made me feel betrayed from every side. But I can't keep hating the people I love. I want to forgive. I want everyone to be happy." With Ruby's forgiveness, Leela felt a mountain lifted from her chest. She hugged Ruby tightly in the crowded cafe, tears and laughter mingling in the golden afternoon light. That very evening, Leela went to Nolan's house. He barely opened the door before she rushed into his arms, sobbing. They stood locked in a silent embrace, letting months of longing and love pour out at last. Nolan whispered, "I'm sorry. I let you suffer too much." Leela only shook her head, holding him tighter. "I just want to be with you, no matter what anyone out there thinks." That night, for the first time in months, all three sat together. No one avoided anything. Ruby listened as her father and Leela shared their feelings, speaking honestly about what they wanted and what they hoped for the future. Nolan didn't beg for forgiveness, only wished for Ruby to understand that the love was real, and that no matter how hard it would be, he wanted to protect both women with all the kindness he had. Ruby was silent for a long moment before smiling softly. "If you two are happy, then I'll be happy too. But please, Dad, always be honest with me, no more secrets." Her words were the key that opened the door to liberation for them all. No more darkness, no more secrets, just forgiveness, understanding, and a new beginning. Winter passed, and laughter and voices gradually returned to the little house. There were still rumors and whispers from the outside world, but for Nolan, Leela, and Ruby, nothing mattered more than genuine feelings and peace in their hearts. Together, they tended the garden, shared candlelit dinners, and walked hand in hand out of their shadowed past, toward a future full of challenges but brimming with hope. On the first day of spring, the three of them sat under the pear tree in the front yard, gentle sunlight sprinkling gold on their hair and shoulders. Leela leaned on Nolan's shoulder, and Ruby smiled with serenity, all of them realizing, only by facing the truth, forgiving mistakes, and bravely protecting your own happiness do you truly become grown and truly free.